no one knows how the hikers died or why. Now, on the 60th anniversary of the hikers' deaths, an American survivalist thinks he's finally found the answer.
Here is one of the world's greatest mysterious adventure stories. 9 young hikers hoping to return never knew it would be their last journey. Fate had another plan for them. Unfortunately, no one knew what happened to them until 6 decades later. Researchers have finally unraveled the puzzle. What happened to them and what new evidence helped investigators solve the mystery? All the answers lie here in this video. Sit tight and let's dig in. On that fateful day. In January 1959, 9 young skiers embarked on an adventurous hiking trip in Russia's Ural Mountains. 9 students of the Soviet Union's Ural Polytechnic Institute and 1 sports instructor who fought in World War II headed into the frigid wilderness. The initial group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, but one member later returned due to health issues, which ultimately saved him from the fate of the others. It's worth noting that each group member was an experienced Grade 2 hiker with ski tour experience. They also had a peak ahead. Upon their return, they would receive Grade 3 certification. The expedition's goal was to reach Otorten, a mountain 10 kilometers north of where the incident occurred. This route was classified as Category 3, the most difficult to traverse. The Sverdlovsk City Route Commission approved the expedition, and the group took a train from Ivdel, a town at the center of the northern province of Sverdlovsk Oblast, in the early morning hours of January 25, 1959. From there, they traveled by truck and lorry to Vijay, the village's last inhabited settlement to the north. It was here that one of them, named Yuri Yudin, turned back due to knee and joint pain, an ailment that saved his life. The remaining 9 hikers continued the trek. They cached surplus food and equipment and proceeded with their journey. However, as they advanced, they got lost due to worsening weather conditions. Instead of moving downhill for shelter, they ended up camp on the mountain's slope, but a month later, they were found dead. Their mysterious deaths would soon be known as the Dyatlov Pass incident. Only photographs of their final days, a perplexing scene at their campsite, and bizarre autopsy results were left behind. The Dyatlov Pass incident has since become a rich source of conspiracy theories ranging from government secrecy to paranormal phenomena, and for good reason. Let's see what some of those theories suggest. The mysterious site. The investigation into their deaths revealed a series of unexplained events that have intrigued people for decades. When the hikers failed to return on time, a search began. Rescuers found their tent severely damaged. It was partially collapsed, covered with snow, and had been ripped apart from the inside. It appeared the hikers had fled in panic. Inside the tent, neatly arranged shoes, clothing, equipment, and partially cooked food were found, suggesting the group had been abruptly interrupted. The first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivenishenko, were found 300 meters from the tent near a small fire. Both were dressed only in their underwear, which was unusual given the -25 to -30 degrees Celsius temperatures. Krivonishenko had burns and a piece of flesh in his mouth, indicating he might have bitten his hand in pain or despair. Medical tests confirmed both died of hypothermia. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin were found dead a few days later near the tent. Dyatlov and Kolmogorova appeared to have died while trying to return to the tent. Slobodin, like the others, died of hypothermia after sustaining a minor skull injury. The positions of the bodies suggested they were disoriented and struggled to return to camp. The mystery deepened when the last 4 hikers were found in May after the snow had melted. The bodies were located in a ravine under several feet of snow. Medical examinations revealed unusual and severe injuries. Among the findings were fractured skulls and massive chest fractures comparable to those from a car crash. However, a more shocking revelation was that there were no external wounds associated with these fractures, suggesting extreme pressure. Some of them, on the other hand, had parts of their bodies missing. Forensic expert Vladimir Vozrozdeny suggested that these injuries were likely caused post-mortem by the bodies being in a fast-moving stream. The official investigation concluded that 6 hikers died from exposure to the cold and 3 from fatal injuries. There was no evidence that others were involved in their deaths, and no signs of a struggle were found, just the footprints of the hikers. However, investigators were still puzzled by the tent's interior and the hikers' belongings. Some speculated that the local Mansi tribe might have attacked the group for trespassing on their territory, but this theory was quickly dismissed due to the lack of evidence. The absence of defensive wounds or signs of a struggle, along with the unique injuries, made this hypothesis unlikely. The idea of a wild animal attack was also considered but ruled out due to the lack of physical injuries. The group dynamics were peaceful, with only minor flirtations and crushes, making it unlikely that a quarrel would lead to violence. No hard substances were at the site, and only a small flask of medicinal alcohol remained intact. One of the bodies sustained injuries too severe to have been caused by a fight. Each theory provides insight into what happened to the 9 hikers, but none is conclusive. New evidence and theories continue to fuel interest among experts and the public in solving the mystery. Among those theories, one interesting idea stands out. Considering the events of the time, this theory might have passed unnoticed. So, what is this theory? Let's find out. Theories of military involvement. There was evidence that the hikers' clothing was found to have radioactive contamination, which was highly unusual. This led many to believe it was due to a secret Soviet military experiment or a nuclear disaster. In fact, the Soviets kept the case classified until the 1970s, which only intensified global interest in the ominous incident. However, it is also good to understand the Soviet society at the time. In the totalitarian Soviet Union, mistakes were often hidden to avoid severe punishment. Acknowledging errors could result in imprisonment, torture, or even death. In such an environment, the government had to protect an image of absolute control and perfection. So about the radioactive contamination, it is good to know that several hikers had participated in the cleanup after the 1957 Kyshtym nuclear incident, which added another layer of mystery. It was unclear why their clothing was so radioactive, and the possibility of a failed weapons test remained a popular theory. The peculiar circumstances surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident have sparked many theories. Some of the most unusual include Yeti attacks, secret KGB operations, and even extraterrestrial involvement. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights in the sky, raising suspicions about UFOs or military training exercises involving parachute mines. Even Lev Ivanov, the case's lead investigator, mentioned that his team saw flying spheres but was instructed to ignore these claims. The case gained renewed attention in 1990 with the release of Anatoly Gushchin's book The Price of State Secrets is 9 Lives, which suggested that the hikers might have fallen victim to a Soviet secret weapon experiment. While the book was criticized for its speculative nature, it brought fresh attention to the case and encouraged previously silent witnesses to come forward with new information. Another recent theory suggests that the hikers were caught in a failed Soviet ballistic missile test. In 2023, new evidence pointed to a failed rocket launch that produced a nitric acid cloud. According to this theory, the toxic fog caused confusion and fear, forcing the hikers to flee their tents and leading them to perish in the extreme cold. Despite the various theories, no explanation accounts for all the strange details of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The mysterious deaths of these 9 hikers continue to puzzle and inspire researchers, leading to ongoing investigations. This case remains one of the most perplexing and unresolved mysteries of the 20th century, with the severe injuries, unusual radiation, and absence of human intervention leaving many questions unanswered. Over the years, more than 75 theories have been put forward, ranging from alien abduction and an abominable snowman attack to radiation fallout from secret weapons tests and a conflict with the indigenous Mansi people. However, another theory still stands out in this mystery. Between 2015 and 2019, experienced investigators from the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation reviewed the initial findings and added crucial data to support the avalanche theory. In previous postulations, key scientific details were missing to back up the avalanche theory. Recently, notable scientists have tried to support this theory with scientific explanations. What is this theory, and how did they support their claims? Let's find out. Environmental theories. In 2019, a Swedish-Russian expedition reached the Dyatlov Pass. They proposed that a powerful katabatic wind was the cause of the tragic events. Katabatic winds are rare but can be deadly. In 1978, such winds ended the lives of 8 hikers and severely injured another during the Anaris mountain tragedy in Sweden. The similar terrain of Anaris Mountain and Dyatlov Pass lends credibility to the idea that katabatic winds may have caused both disasters. Under the intense katabatic wind at Dyatlov Pass, the hikers would have struggled to stay inside their tent. The best course of action would have been to cover the tent with snow to prevent it from being blown away and seek shelter behind the trees. The hikers left a flashlight on top of the tent, possibly to help them find their way back once the wind subsided. The expedition suggested building 2 bivouac shelters. However, one collapsed, burying 4 hikers and causing severe injuries. Donnie Icar, in his 2013 book Dead Mountain, explored the infrasound theory. According to this idea, wind over Kholat Mountain created a katabatic vortex that generated infrasound, causing feelings of fear. Icar suggested that the infrasound caused physical and mental distress in the hikers, leading them to flee their tents in panic. They may have calmed down once they descended the slope and left the infrasound behind. However, the darkness prevented them from returning to the tent. 3 of the hikers suffered fatal injuries after falling into a dark ravine and hitting rocks. Many argued that the avalanche theory, initially proposed in 1959, still didn't seem to add up. The team's tent encampment was cut into the snow on a slope with an incline seemingly too mild to permit an avalanche, and there was no snowfall on the night of February 1st that could have increased the weight of the snow burden on the slope and triggered a collapse. Most of the blunt force trauma injuries and some of the soft tissue damage were atypical of those caused by avalanches whose victims usually asphyxiate. And if an avalanche had occurred, why was there a gap of at least 9 hours, according to forensic data, between the team members cutting the slope for their encampment and the eventual avalanche? That curious delay was particularly interesting to Alexander Puzrin, a geotechnical engineer at ETH Zurich, one of Switzerland's federal institutes of technology. He had recently published a paper explaining how, strange though it may seem, an earthquake can trigger an avalanche with a gap ranging from mere minutes to several hours between the 2 events. Johann Gome, head of the Snow Avalanche Simulation Laboratory at EPFL, another Swiss federal technical institute in Lausanne, got to know Puzrin during the 2019 Russian inquiry into what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Suspecting the avalanche delay issue held one of the keys to solving the mystery, they teamed up to create analytical models and computer simulations to try and replicate the obfuscated hours that stole the mountaineers' lives. The shallow slope argument against an avalanche was tackled early on. It turned out not to be all that shallow. The undulating topography on Kholat Sekil, covered by snowfall, made the slope appear mild. Still, it was closer to 30 degrees, the rule of thumb minimum requirement for many avalanches. Reports dating back to the site's initial investigation also describe an underlying snow layer on the mountain that didn't clump together, providing a weak, slippery base over which a lot of overlying snow could easily slide. Then there was the question of the snow mass. The cut the team made in the snow to pitch their tent destabilized the slope, but additional snow had to have collected before any avalanche could happen. Meteorological estimations from St. Petersburg's Voykov Main Geophysical Observatory support the researchers' assumptions that nearly 5 feet of snow would have covered the tent, with winds blowing up to 25 miles per hour. The researchers' computer simulations show the avalanche on Kholat Sekil wouldn't have been huge, perhaps involving a block of icy matter a mere 16 feet long, about the size of an SUV. The small size explains why no evidence of an avalanche was found during the initial investigation. It would have infilled the cutout campsite before being quickly buried by fresh snowfall. Ultimately, according to Live Science, the federal Russian investigation in 2019 and another federal investigation in 2020 concluded that a slab avalanche, which involves a slab of snow breaking away from a deeper layer of snow and sliding downhill in large, block-like chunks, most likely sent the 9 doomed hikers to their icy graves in 1959. But how could such a small collapse have caused such traumatic injuries? Keep watching. The avalanche theory. How true? To answer that question, the scientists relied on some unorthodox sources of inspiration and information. Gome explained how a few years back he was struck by how well the movement of snow was depicted in the 2013 Disney movie Frozen, so impressed that he decided to ask its animators how they pulled it off. Following a trip to Hollywood to meet with the specialists who worked on Frozen's snow effects, Gaume modified the film's snow animation code for his avalanche simulation models. albeit with a decidedly less entertaining purpose to simulate the impacts that avalanches would have on the human body. Code in hand, the pair needed realistic values for the forces and pressures the human body could experience in an avalanche. This time, their information came from the automotive industry. We discovered that in the 70s, General Motors, GM, took 100 cadavers and broke their ribs, says Puzrin, hitting them with different weights at different velocities to see what would happen during a car crash. The data was ultimately used to calibrate the safety of seatbelts. Some of the cadavers used in the GM tests were braced with rigid supports, while others weren't, a variable that ended up being serendipitous for Puzrin and Gaumi. Back on the slopes of Kholat Seichel, the team members had placed their bedding atop their skis. This meant that the avalanche, which hit them as they slept, struck an unusually rigid target. The GM cadaver experiments from the 1970s could be used to calibrate their impact models with remarkable precision. The researchers' computer models demonstrated that a 16-foot-long block of hefty snow could, in this unique situation, handily break the ribs and skulls of people sleeping on a rigid bed. These injuries would have been severe but not fatal, at least not immediately, says Puzrin. Following the 2021 study, 3 more expeditions were made to Kholat Seichel, which confirmed the area is clearly avalanche-prone and that the slopes above the Dyatlov encampment were indeed steep enough to create avalanches. In fact, 2 fresh slab avalanches were observed during a January 2022 expedition under conditions similar to those on the fateful night of February 1, 1959. Geordie Hendricks, Chief Scientific Advisor for Antarctica New Zealand and former Director of the Snow and Avalanche Lab at Montana State University, who was not involved in the current research, has long suspected an avalanche would be the most plausible cause for the Dyatlov Pass incident. Still, it wasn't obvious that Kholat Seichel was avalanche terrain. He says the team's simulations have recreated the deadly night with newfound accuracy. The way they've shown that empirically in their equations seems perfectly robust, Hendricks says. It's exciting how new science developments in the avalanche world can shed new light on these historic puzzles. It's a bit surprising that such a small avalanche could cause such violent injuries, says Jim McElwain, a geohazards expert at Durham University in England who was not involved with the study. He suspects that the block of snow needed to be incredibly stiff and moving at some speed to accomplish this. He adds that the research doesn't explain why these people, after being hit by an avalanche, ran off without their clothes into the snow. He continues, if you're in that type of harsh environment, it's suicide to leave shelter without your clothes on. For people to do that, they must have been terrified by something. I assume that one of the most likely things is that one of them went crazy for some reason. I can't understand why else they would have behaved in that way unless they were trying to flee from someone who had been tracking them. Gaume, on the other hand, views the situation differently. As he tells Live Science, when the hikers decided to go to the forest, they took care of their injured friends. No one was left behind. I think it is a great story of courage and friendship in the face of a brutal force of nature. Freddie Wilkinson, a professional mountain climber and guide not involved with the work, says that it's entirely reasonable that such innocuous-sounding slabs could cause acute bodily harm. Some slabs can be quite hard, and it's very plausible they can result in blunt trauma wounds, he says. I'm absolutely convinced that the tragedy was the result of wind and snow deposition and the fact that they pitched camp in the lee of a ridge, Wilkinson adds. I've made this mistake in my mountaineering career more than once. During an expedition to Antarctica in 2012, tents belonging to Wilkinson's team were pitched inside a circle of wind-deflecting snow walls they made. Returning to camp after 3 days, his team found that 2 tents in the wind-shielded wall were completely buried. The avalanche that appears to have occurred on February 1, 1959, on Kholat Seichel, was an incredibly rare event. But rare events do occur, and this one could have come to pass only at that exact spot, at that exact moment, during that very wintry night. But what about after the avalanche? Let's find out. The perfect storm. What happened after the avalanche is speculative, but the current thinking is that the team cut themselves out of the smothered tent, fleeing in a panic toward temporary shelter in the tree line, a mile or so downslope. 3 of them were severely injured, but everyone was found outside of the tent, so it's likely that the more able-bodied survivors dragged the injured out of their smothered shelter in an attempt to rescue them. This is a story of courage and friendship, says Puzrin. Most of the 9 who perished on Kholat cycle died of hypothermia, while others may have succumbed to their injuries. The state of undress in which some were found remains puzzling, as do reports that some of the bodies had traces of radioactivity, which may be a result of thorium present in camping lanterns. The missing body parts of some victims may have simply been a result of scavenging animals pecking at the dead, but that too remains an open question. However, another curious mind has devoted her time to studying the incident and has come up with a different perspective. Teodora Hadja, the founder of Dyatlov has done extensive research on the case. She translated Russian files into English and compiled a database of all case photographs, evidence, and theories, establishing herself as an expert on the tragedy. Hadja offers an alternative explanation for the events on the mountain. After a thorough analysis of the evidence, she believes that the lives of the hikers were terminated. Hadja theorizes that the hikers, terrified, fled their tent in a panic and encountered armed individuals. She suggests a brief struggle occurred before the hikers were forced to move to the tree line, where they eventually succumbed to the cold. According to Hadja, the assailants might have initially thought the cold would end the lives of the hikers, but later returned to finish the job when they saw signs of life, including a bonfire. Hadja claims the ordeal lasted several hours, involving multiple attacks and escalating violence, with the harsh alpine conditions adding to the confusion and fear. While Hadja's theory has its challenges, it explains the hikers' unusual behavior and deaths. She and other researchers continue investigating the Dyatlov Pass incident, one of the 20th century's most baffling mysteries. Although Puzrin and Gaume do not claim they have solved the mystery, their research offers a plausible explanation for the Dyatlov Pass incident. They stated that while the investigation is ongoing, their involvement has concluded. The snow slab or avalanche theory may not be as sensational as government conspiracies or attacks by mythical creatures, but it offers some comfort to the victims' families. It provides a likely explanation for the tragedy, though some questions remain. Russian authorities have committed to using advanced forensics and analysis to gather more information about the incident. This study simply offers a reasonable account of the events that ultimately triggered the deaths of Kholat cycle. Of course, this is still just a theory, but it was the first time a truly scientific explanation had been put forward regarding the Dyatlov Pass mystery that held up against counter-arguments. That matters not least because the enigmatic tragedy remains heartbreaking for the living relatives of the victims. Some in Russia, however, have voiced the opinion that these hikers took stupid or unnecessary risks that ultimately ended their lives. This kind of tarnishes their legacy, says Puzrin, whose study shows that this freak avalanche would have surprised mountaineering experts with a lifetime of experience. The Dyatlov team members, Puzrin says, were very competent people who would never have foreseen the danger of clearing a space for their tent on what looked like a gentle slope. Gaume nevertheless fears the explanation they presented today is too straightforward for much of the public to accept. People don't want it to be an avalanche, he says. It's too normal. That unyielding skepticism and the haunting nature of the Dyatlov Pass incident will keep conspiracy theories alive well into the future. To me, this story is uniquely powerful, profound, and poignant because this was a group of young people going off into the wilderness and they never came back, says Wilkinson. People love to invent implausible scenarios about death in the wilderness because we will never know 100% what happened. Today, a documentary was produced in 2000 by a regional television company titled The Mystery of Dyatlov Pass. With the help of the film crew, a Yekaterinburg writer, Anna Matveyeva, published a docudrama novella of the same name. A large part of the book includes broad quotations from the official case, diaries of victims, interviews with searchers, and other documentaries collected by the filmmakers. Do you think the avalanche theory is plausible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Do well to like this video and subscribe to this channel to get notified whenever we drop entertaining and educational videos like this. Thank you for watching and check out our other videos on this channel.